Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, Coworker gets me fired. My many years waiting for revenge. After that, Hoa board tries to force me to remove my trampoline. I get them removed from the board instead. Finally, students pranked me. I had the last laugh. Before we get into today's episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss another episode of r/ProRevenge. Coworker gets me fired. My many years waiting for revenge. This is my first post here, and I only have done this after telling the whole story to a friend who posts on Reddit and told me that this story had to be put here after telling him the whole story. This is a long post, you've been warned. If revenge is best served cold, then my revenge was many years in the freezer, and, this week, was finally pulled out and had whipped cream and a cherry put on top before finally served. Background. So I worked for Company A for almost a decade that had a small team consisting of 10 people, doing commissioned work for businesses in my city. The owner treated us like family, knowing that we worked long and hard days, sometimes up to 60 hours in a week. He paid us better than expected. Bonuses and perks he negotiated with businesses that commissioned our work. Even gave the whole company a week off paid when his son was getting married so we could attend it. We had our squabbles like any other family, and things weren't always bright and perfect, but this is to show how nice owner treated his employees. And didn't screw me over. After working there for years, the manager position came open. Since by then I was one of the most senior workers with Company A, so I thought I would apply, which had a few others interested do as well. I didn't get the position, mainly because, despite my experience at Company A, I didn't have a business administration degree. Someone who worked for owner did, so he got it. Realizing the education I would have to get, and the demand of this job, I thought long and hard and concluded that, if I wanted to go anywhere in life, I would have to get that degree. Coming right off high school to work for Company A was great, but if I wanted to do something more I would have to go to university. I talked to the owner and gave my 2 weeks notice. When I explained what I wanted to do and why, he understood that I was trying to make something of myself. This all becomes relevant later, I promise. Going to university, I found that I had tuition covered through government grants, but not things like food, rent, etc. So I looked around and eventually found work at Company B. Company B was a retail store, with a bigger staff than I had been used to, somewhere around 50 employees, but had such a huge employee turnaround that it was scary at times. They dealt with a wider range of goods from groceries to very expensive items. They had a certain niche clientele that they could order items for and cater to. I ended up working part-time in their warehouse and answered to the warehouse supervisor, who answered to the manager. There were other supervisors for other parts of the store, but for this only the sales supervisor is relevant. Skip forward 7 years. In that time I got my BA degree and worked at Company B the whole time, going from part-time to full and eventually applied for the warehouse supervisor position. I was interviewed, got the job, been supervisor for months when the manager and I hired Kay as a warehouse clerk. Kay isn't the one to get the revenge, but she played a crucial part in the revenge. Then Itch gets hired. Itch started out as a cashier, working quickly up the chain and brown-nosing as many co-workers as possible, including the manager. When a sales rep went on maternity leave, Itch quickly jumped at the chance to work in sales and ended up permanently being a part of that team than the sales supervisor soon after. Me and Itch got along like oil and water. We butted heads over things constantly. She would tell the manager all the small things that I did, but called me a snitch when I reported the issues she was causing. She would badmouth me and my warehouse staff, talk over me at meetings and try to take credit for my ideas. She openly told co-workers that I was the cause of many issues and couldn't wait for me to leave. Oh, and she was never at fault. It would be the customer's fault, my fault, the delivery driver's fault, another co-worker's fault, etc. There were times when we got together well, but far and few between. I get fired. So one day, a very, and I mean very, expensive ring set, over $5,000 I found out later, ordered by one of our customers, comes in. Years ago I set up a procedure for any type of jewelry so that it will not get lost or stolen. The last step is, once we have done everything with it in the warehouse, we take it to the office and have someone put it in the safe immediately. This particular time, I was the one who received the rings, so, once going through the procedure, told Kay that I was taking it to the office. The only one available who had a combination to the safe was Itch. I asked her if she could open the safe. She looked at me, looked at the jewelry box in my hand, then said, "Put it down here on my desk, I'll put it away once I'm done this email." Keep in mind that me and the Itch had a serious spat over something earlier that day, and I generally didn't feel like being close to her if I could help it. So I never saw her put it in the safe myself. The next day, I get a call from the manager to come to the office. I head there to find manager, Itch, and the HR consultant they pull in when some real shit hits the fan. Manager tells me that said ring set have disappeared. I tell them the procedure I followed and last I saw them was with Itch. Manager tells me that Itch checked the box and that said box was empty. Manager then pulls the box out. Sure enough, the box the rings were in was indeed empty. I swear to manager that the rings were inside when I checked them before given to Itch. At this point, it's my word against hers. By stroke of bad luck, the in-store video recorder had broken down days before the incident, so there was no way to verify what happened. We all know someone has to take the blame for this, and that's when Itch strikes, saying that it was my fault, since it was last seen in my hands. Manager asks if this is true, then I realize that, yes, I was indeed the last person to touch the thing, and I never actually saw Itch pick up the box. Itch gives me the look of that screamed gotcha. Manager and the HR consultant ask us both to leave. After what seemed like forever, I get called in. Manager tells me that, since I was responsible for the rings at the time and now are lost, they would be firing me. But, since they had no proof as to whether I stole the rings or not, they wouldn't press charges, which scared the crap out of me as this was the first time I heard of them thinking this. I go back to the warehouse, tell Kay and the other warehouse clerks just what happened, grabbed my personal belongings and left that day. After a couple weeks of trying to get my head around what happened and weighing my options, I decide my first priority is to try to get some sort of job, and consider it lucky if I get a job flipping burgers with a bad rep when they ask company B. I call the owner of company A to get a good reference from them and explain what happened and why I was calling, only to get the shock of a lifetime. The manager position was about to be open. The guy who I lost the position to was retiring soon, due to complicated health reasons. Owner had kept tabs on me while at university and understood when I didn't immediately come back to him. But with a golden opportunity like this, he wanted me back and I wasn't going to say no. I dive into my new job I originally wanted with an owner I enjoyed working for. I thought, then and there, everything would be behind me, not knowing it would come back, not to bite me, but to pay dividends. The revenge. Kay's side. This I found out after Itch's reckoning. After I was fired, Kay knew she had to do something about Itch. Kay knew that I wouldn't lose or steal something like the rings, but also knew that, without proof, Itch would deny that she did it and have Kay in her crosshairs to attack next. So, after talking with her husband, she hatched a plan. She started hanging out with Itch, telling her things like "I'm so glad he's gone" or "wish he had been fired much earlier." Itch, feeling high from getting rid of one of her thorns in her side, soaked it all in, and after a couple weeks, invited Kay and Kay's husband, from now on KH, for drinks at her place with her and Itch's husband, BH. Months pass. Kay and KH do things regularly together with Itch and BH, including drinking on weekends and couple-related events. When together, Kay would occasionally badmouth me, and Itch would agree. Finally, after over a year of playing nice, when Kay and KH were over at Itch's for one of their drinking parties, Kay randomly badmouthed me, mentioning the rings in passing. Then Itch says something that Kay was waiting for. I wanted those rings, so I stole them. Kay, hearing this, asks for more details. KH looks at her, tries to wave her off with one hand, then gives up when Itch keeps talking. That day, Itch had stopped writing her email and was going to put the rings in the safe. The safe was open and she was about to put the rings away when Itch had an idea. See, as mentioned above, Itch wanted me gone from company B. She also wanted those rings. She also knew that the cameras weren't working. She figured that she could pocket the rings, tell the manager they were missing, and spin it so I would take the blame. K then asks where are the rings now, and Itch, being too drunk and not seeing a reason not to brag, not only tells her, but shows her where they are in her room. All while KH had been recording the whole conversation on his phone. The hand waving was him saying he started recording. K gives a copy of the recording to manager the next work day. Police are called immediately. Itch is arrested and her house is raided. They find the rings. K and KH give the recording and testimonies to police. Itch's reckoning has begun. Revenge, my side. I get a call from the prosecutor's office after Itch is arrested and charged with theft over $5,000, among other things. He wants me to testify about what she did to me. I didn't skip a beat in saying yes. Fast track to the trial. Prosecutor has me, K, and KH testify and plays the recording of Itch admitting that she stole them. Her attorney tries to throw out the case saying that K got Itch deliberately drunk. But judge didn't buy it, since there was proof she drank all the time. Judge was lenient and gave her 5 years in prison, which she yelled was unfair, but I personally thought she got off easy. Meanwhile, as the trial was happening, I was talking with a lawyer to sue Itch for setting me up like she did. We were also going to sue Company B for wrongful termination, but they settled the day they got notice of the lawsuit and knew they would lose. Itch wasn't so lucky. They tried some trickery by having BH divorce her and he received everything in the divorce, but my lawyer added him into the lawsuit as well. My lawyer asked overall $3,500 for emotional distress, back pay from when I was fired until I started up with Company A again and legal fees. And now, you are wondering where the metaphoric Sherry is on this story? Well, recently we had someone leave Company A, so we were hiring someone to replace them. Owner was going over the resumes and set up interviews for the job this week. Lo and behold, Itch was one of the people to apply, but he didn't know that. I looked at the resume, was about to trash it, but then smiled. Owner set up the interview. She came in at her slotted time, looking to brown nose her way through. Then she saw me. I smiled an evil smile. She went white. All I said was, Itch, how are you? Remember me? A deer in the headlight look from her. I look at her resume and say I'm sorry, I do not think you will be a good fit for our company. Thank you for applying. She said not one word and left. Her board tries to force me to remove my trampoline. I get them removed from the board instead. I put a trampoline in my backyard in early 2017. I have 3 young boys and we have enjoyed it immensely. My neighbor, the HOA president at the time, went to sell his house in spring of 2018 and his realtor said the trampoline in my backyard might be a detriment to getting top dollar for his home. So he convinced the neighbor on the other side of my house to complain as well. Out of the blue, I received a message from the HOA property manager that the neighbors complained and I would need to submit a form to get it approved. Intermission. What's sad is that I was friendly with both of these people. They had been in my home. They could have talked to me face to face. With one of the neighbors I paid for our shared fence at her request, since her neighbor on her other side wouldn't contribute to their shared fence, another board member and human piece of garbage. I would have been willing to dig a hole for the trampoline, to hide it more, or purchase a new one with elastic bands rather than springs, to make it quieter. Both of those options are cheaper than getting a lawyer. But nobody asked. Nobody came to me to have a face-to-face, heart-to-heart discussion about their concerns. A few ironies. These are 5-bedroom homes. Clearly people with kids are going to move in, and they are going to be noisy in their backyard with or without play equipment. The guy who sold his home smoked like a chimney. I don't think my trampoline should have been his top concern. The people who ended up buying his home are a great family with 2 kids, who don't care about toys in other people's backyards. My neighbors have raised kids to adulthood, one of them 2 very active boys. When I pointed this out to her, the words that actually came out of her mouth were I know it's challenging to raise boys, but we're at different stages of our lives. As if that justified her trying to screw me. Back to the story. I filled out the form and sent it in. The Architectural Review Committee denied it a month later. I appealed the decision and met with the board in August. They sent me a letter and said it was in violation. I asked which rules I violated. They never sent me a letter, so I asked again a week ago. The property manager was adamant she had sent the letter, but I asked for proof. She forwarded an email where she put my name in the T field after the fact. I had a strong suspicion it was after the fact due to the following reasons. And how a meeting was mentioned that never took place. The responses to my questions varied in color, indicating they had been edited at different times. She responded immediately to my request for proof by indicating she would forward the email, but then took an hour, presumably editing a draft she never sent. She cited a rule early in the email, but then cited an additional rule later that superseded the first. The first cited rule could have simply been omitted. The message was not marked as forwarded message at the top, and the sent time didn't include seconds. None of these things are a smoking gun, but they are suspicious. I asked the other people in the T field if they received a copy of the email with my name in the address field. The only honest member of the board replied he hadn't. The rest remained silent, because they didn't want to look like they and the property manager dropped the ball. Intermission. If you're curious why the board didn't like my trampoline, here is the rationale provided in the letter that was never sent. Due to the close proximity of the homes to each other and the small yards, the trampoline is unsightly to the homes surrounding it. Realtors for those homes surrounding you have stated that it is a detraction to selling homes and is lowering the home values of those around it. There have also been neighbor complaints regarding the noise level, which creates those homeowners to be unable to enjoy their homes. They are also unable to use certain portions of their homes while the trampoline is being used. My kids all weigh under 35 pounds. They go to bed at 7 PM and don't jump on the trampoline in the morning before 10 AM. My neighbors bought homes 10 feet away from mine. What did they expect? Back to the story. The year-end meeting was scheduled for yesterday, and 4 board positions were up for election. I got 3 of my friends on the street to run with me. I went door to door every day for a week and spoke with the majority of homeowners about their discontent with the street. I got a third of the community to sign proxy forms stating that I would vote on their behalf. I went to the meeting last night and put these fools on blast. I listed calmly all the ways the current board was failing the community and my plan to right their wrongs. The vote was a landslide, in favor of myself and my friends getting elected. One awful board member remains. But here's the minority. We fired the property manager who was uncommunicative and flat out dishonest. The trampoline endures. The only bummer is now I have to manage a street which includes some legit crazy people. But this whole episode has convinced my wife that we will never live in her again, which I count as a huge victory in addition to the trampoline remaining where it is today. Students pranked me. I had the last laugh. I spent about 10 years teaching high school humanities at a small private school. For my first 2 years, I didn't have a classroom, just a small office. I would bring what I needed for each class on a cart and go from room to room, depending on which teacher had a prep at any given time. This was incredibly inconvenient and, not being the most organized of teachers to begin with, made things difficult to keep track of. There were a group of 11th grade boys who decided to make things a little more difficult for me. They were good kids, we got along well. I coached several of them on the school soccer team, but they decided that since my office would often be empty, it was a great place to prank. It was never anything too serious, things falling over when I opened the door, or things disappearing for a day and then turning up in a different place the next day. Nothing was ever damaged, and I could never prove who it was. Even though I knew. My school had mandatory final exams in each academic course. I didn't really think they were necessary, so I would generally make them pretty easy with a lot of preparation. I would give out study sheets and play review games for a couple of weeks before the test, and there was no reason the students wouldn't do well on them. I had approval of admin to do this as they weren't particularly fond of the final exam rule either. It was a school board policy. A few nights before the offending boys had their exam, I had a brainwave. I created a second exam. gone were the multiple choice questions and obvious things from the review sheets. In their place came detailed questions about concepts that were briefly mentioned in class. Essay question after essay question. Ambiguous questions with no clear answers. Definitions of words that there was no way they knew. It took a couple of hours, but I laughed the whole time. When the test came, I had the special exams at the bottom of the pile and handed them out to each of the 4 or 5 boys. I told my vice principal what was happening and he insisted on being present. I started the timer and watched as the boys flipped over their papers. It was all I could do to keep a straight face. Eyes went wide. Heads were shaking. Panic was setting in, especially as they saw all their classmates flying through their exams. One of the boys raised their hand. "Sorry, no questions during the final. You should be prepared based on your study sheets." I let them go for about 5 or 10 minutes of terror before I gathered the fake tests and gave them the real ones. They all passed with flying colors and never pranked my office again. It was glorious.